When we run our end-to-end tests with the terminal command npm run test e2e, we're actually utilizing the Vue CLI 3 service module. And one handy feature it has is that it will set up and tear down a Webpack dev server before and after the Nightwatch tests run. However, it doesn't set up our API dev server since that's out of the scope of Vue CLI 3. So in this video, we're going to make use of Nightwatch hooks, not only to start the API server before our tests run, but also to clear and reseed the database so that our end-to-end tests can run in isolation. First, we need to create another special Nightwatch module called globals, where we can define those hooks. So let's create that module now by going to the terminal and typing touch tests e2e globals.js. Now we'll go to our Nightwatch config, and we need to tell Nightwatch where we've put the globals module. So we can do this by adding a new property globals underscore path, and we're going to assign to that the relative path of the module we just created, which is tests e2e globals.js. Let's now open the new globals file now and begin writing code to automatically start our API server. First thing we'll do is export a module from this file by going module.exports equals an object, and we can then create a before property, and we're going to assign to that an async function. Now this is going to be the before hook that runs before any of the tests. Now since this hook is asynchronous, it's also going to take a done argument, which when called tells Nightwatch it's free to move on to run other tests. Recall from the server unit testing part of the course that we can require our server file in another module as it is set up as a module as well. So let's load that module at the top of our globals file by putting const app equals require, and we're going to have to go up 2 directories, and then it will be server index like that. We can then go back into our before hook, and we're going to await app.listen, and that's going to start our server. Now we need to pass the server port to this method call. So since Nightwatch is bootstrapped by the Vue CLI 3 service, the .env file is loaded and environment variables from there will be available. So let's go to the top of the file, and we're going to create a const object. And this one will be server port, and that's going to be extracted from process.env. We can then pass server port to the listen call, and then we're going to call done. Now since we're using async await, we should really wrap all this in a try catch block. So let's do that, and we'll move those lines in there like that. And then in the catch block, we can just go console log and log the error. And we also want to call process.exit and pass 1 as an argument. So that's going to tell Node to exit the process with an error. Now if we don't do this, Nightwatch will hang after the error. Next, we'll need a way to close our server after the tests have run. Otherwise the server will just stay running and Nightwatch won't shut down correctly. So to do this, we're going to create an after hook. Now just like the before hook, we'll assign it an async function with done as an argument. Now to close our server, we'll need the object returned from this app.listen call. So let's create a variable in the scope above both these hooks that we're going to call server. Then in our before hook, we're going to initialize the value of server by assigning it to app.listen. Now the after hook will now have access to server as well. So what we can do in here is go server.close. and we can actually pass done as an argument to that. We'll also need to call process.exit, and that's going to ensure that the node process terminates. So let's go ahead and run our test suite to see if this is now working. So the first thing you'll want to do is to exit the API server if you already have it running. Now you can go ahead and put npm run test end-to-end. So after that runs, you'll see that it works, but if you scroll up, you'll see that there's an error reported in the output. So the problem is that the server is going to be loaded twice. So you're going to see this address already in use error. Now the reason this is happening is because when we require the server module, it automatically starts the server. Now we don't want it to do this because we can't programmatically stop the server unless we manually start it. Now we had the same issue when we wrote unit tests back in module 4, and the solution was to add a conditional block to prevent the server listening during tests. So let's open up the server index file, and you can see that down here where we've got if node env does not equal test, then we start the app listening. Now this doesn't work in the case of our end-to-end tests though, because end-to-end tests are somewhat confusingly run in a production environment, not a test environment. So what we're going to do is we're going to set a separate environment variable when we run our end-to-end tests that we can use in the server file here. So let's go back to the package.json file, and here in our test E2E script, we're going to define an inline environment variable E2E, and we're going to set its value to 1, which is the equivalent of true. And what we want to do is make that a parameter of the cross-env package so that it gets set correctly on any operating system. Now inside our server module, we can extract another variable from process.env up here, which is going to be the inline one that we just set, E2E. What we want to do next is create a new variable. I'm going to call this isTest, and we're going to assign to that node env is equivalent to the string test or E2E. So what that means is that this variable isTest is going to be true if the node environment is test, as it will be in the case of unit tests, or if this E2E variable is set to true, which it will be if we're running our end-to-end tests. So now what we can do is go to the bottom here and adjust this conditional. So rather than the current condition, we're going to change that to not isTest. Now this way, if either unit or end-to-end tests are running, the server will not automatically start listening. With that done, let's try and run our end-to-end test suite again. So we'll repeat that command. You can see that all of our assertions have passed, and since we don't have the server process running anywhere else, it means our before hook must have worked. In a moment, we'll be testing the registration process, which means we're going to be engaging our database. To ensure our tests don't pollute other tests when they run, we're going to need to clear and reseed the database before each test runs, exactly as we did with our unit tests, if you recall. Before we do that though, let's make it so that we're using the test database for our end-to-end tests so as not to mess up our development database. So to do this, let's change the way that this DB name variable is set, and we're going to replace the condition in the ternary operator. So instead of using node env is equivalent to the string test, we're instead going to change that to isTest. This way, if we're performing either a unit or an end-to-end test, then we're going to use DB name test, which is obviously the test database name. Otherwise, we use the production database name. And that variable, of course, gets passed to the Mongo connection here. We're now going to use Nightwatch's before each hook to clear and reseed the database before each test. Now, one slightly confusing thing about this hook is that if you put it here in the globals file with the other hooks that we've made, it will only run before each test suite and not each test. So instead, we have to put it into our test spec file. But since the body of this hook is going to be very similar to that of the before hook, what I want to do is actually go ahead and just copy that. And then we'll come over to our test file, which is here. And we'll go to the top of the object, and I'm going to paste that in above the first test. Let's now rename this from before to before each, and we're going to remove this server initialization line here. We also need to add an additional argument to the method profile. Hooks defined in spec files also get browser as the first argument. So we're going to change this to browser, and then done will be the second argument. Now recall from the third part of the course that we created a module for seeding the development database. So let's reuse that module now to seed the test database before each end-to-end test, since we want to simulate a production environment. So to do this, we're going to require this module at the top of the file here. So we're going to go const seed equals require, and we're going to have to go up 3 whole directories and then into scripts, and then seed like that. Now in our before each hook, above this done call, let's now await promise.all, and we're going to pass to that an array with 2 items. We're going to have seed users and seed items like that. Seed items. So what this is going to do is it's first going to clear and then seed the users and then items collection in the test database. And if you're wondering more about these methods, then you probably just want to go and have a look at that file again, or go back to, I think it was module 4, where we covered how we created that. All right, with that done, let's again run our test suite and make sure everything is still working. So once that completes, you won't notice anything different in the outcome, but we can now rest easy knowing that the API server is going to be automatically started and stopped, plus we're clearing and receiving the database before each test.